when did you first see your work, yourself as a weaver, and what you do and how you be in the world as weaving, whether or not you use this word? What was that first moment? And I will turn to you, Lana, first. Answer this question.
Oh, thank you. When I think of that, yeah, when I think of that first memory, the funny enough, what comes up for me was when I was in Girl Scout. I was very active as a Girl Scout. So for me, it really got me into being in community, serving communities, doing activities within the community. And even as a young, yeah, I would say teenager, there was really a sense of fulfillment in contributing and serving communities. And it has also opened doors for me in not just the communities that I'm part of, but also dipping into other communities as well. So being introduced to a broader what's this ecosystem. And that, I would say, has been a foundation for the rest of the other work that I've been part of, because it has really truly connected me to um how how precious it is to be part of a community, and also not just to be a part of community, but to also serve others in community.
It's beautiful, and I think an experience that I know that many have shared, and maybe in origins of your weaving, if you are listening, and have been in Girl Scouts. Vishal, how about you?
Oh, there's so many stories that come to mind around my identity, but I think the one that's probably prominent and more recent, not actually recent, but around 2013, I was in the US on a fellowship. It's called the Eisenhower Fellowship. And just a bit of a background for that, born and brought up in a city called Bangalore in India. Uh, Grew up in a relatively poor family where both my parents had to do multiple jobs to make sure me and my sisters went to the best schools that they could afford, which is what gave us a chance to go to a convent school and get the best education. Uh, and then in 2013, to be on a fellowship like the Eisenhower Fellowship, uh, where you get a chance to meet, senators and ministers and some of your colleagues from different parts of the world, ministers and heads of businesses. It was quite overwhelming. And then a week into the fellowship, the the office of the fellowship asked me if I would like to address a group of their donors at a dinner. Uh, and I wasn't sure I'll be able to do that. I said yes. And this was in this massively beautiful building. See, it was a wealthy space, and people were in their best clothes. Most of them donors and supporters and well-wishers of the fellowship. And I was really anxious, worried about what I might say and how I might say it. And as I went up on stage, just to center myself, I closed my eyes for a few minutes, and I didn't know how long my eyes were closed. Uh, and then I opened my eyes and I said what I needed to say. And honestly, I don't remember what I said. I must have spoken for about 4 or 5 minutes. And it was almost like when I finished talking, I had come out of some kind of a trance. And I saw the room around me. And this was when dinner was being served, so people could eat while they were listening to me. But when I looked at the room around me, no one was eating dinner, and everyone was in pin drop silence. Uh, so I got a bit worried about what happened. What did I say? I was still a bit of in a trance and shock, so I went back to my seat, and then people came up to me and they're like, this is the best thing I've heard in my life, and this is the best thing I've heard in a long time. And there was a standing ovation. And it took me many years to understand what happened in that moment. later. And I kept going back to that moment. And I understood that one of the things that happened in that moment when I took the pause, when I went quiet the initial few minutes, in addition to centering me, it helped me connect my heart, my body, my soul, and my spirit. It kind of aligned in. And then what I shared was a message that came through me. It was not a message that I gave, but it was a message that came through me. It probably came from the deepest spaces of what I needed to share in that room full of decision makers and influencers in the world. Uh, and one of the first things I learned about the idea of weaving is being able to help someone through how you show up, to look at themselves and the world around them from a whole different perspective. And in that moment, that's what I learned. It took me a few years after that to learn that that's what happened. And now I'm able to call into that in spaces whenever I can. I've learned to cultivate it. And for me, that's one of the core principles of weaving.
Yeah. It strikes me of that, two words that both of you shared, center and ecosystem, and how they're almost a yin and yang of this, of weaving, that through that center, through that sense of connection to heart, mind, body, spirit, as you mentioned, Vishal, and connection to self, that identity that's formed through your Girl Scouts experience, Lana, you are able to observe and sense the ecosystem. I'd be curious to hear a little bit more, Lana, that relationship, that art of what seems as polarities almost, self and ecosystem. How are they polar, or are they join as one?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for. I'm sharing in the chat the term pakikiramdam. So in Filipino psychology, we have the term pakikiramdam, which is like deep sensing and deep attunement. And one of the things that coming from the Filipino culture, one of the things that I was so much yeah, I would say born to the culture of sensing others and sensing what is happening around you. I We're also pre-colonial societies of the Filipinos were animistic, so this understanding of nature and the world. You just do not go into space without saying tabi tabi po, meaning excuse me. um so there is that practice of attunement that does not only mean attunement with yourself, with your, with your own emotions and your own body, but also what's happening outside of you. And this is where I see this deep connection, Valentina, in terms of there is no other in Filipino psychology. We even use the term kapwa, meaning how can I see our shared humanity? How can I see myself in the other? And this is where I see it's like it's a continuation of, like, myself is a continuation of the other, and the other is a continuation of me, and this interdependence is what, what humanity is all about. We are wired to, even before we can regulate ourselves, we are co-regulating each other. And I love this idea of and I need to remember the name, but there was this Sufi leader that says all of humanity is just one nervous system. And that for me is what an ecosystem is about, that we are all connected, we are all interdependent, and that we are all within our shared humanity.
That's beautiful. And I see some resonance in the chat with that. That also the language also that you've put to that deeper attunement. Thank you, Vishal. Anything that resonates with you from that?
I couldn't say it better than what Lana has said. It's just it is so beautiful that in so many of our cultures and languages, there are terms that cannot exactly be translated, but they we know that they mean something quite profound. Uh, in my own journey, and weaving is an identity that has come in more recently, the language, the articulation. But there are certain elements and principles of weaving uh, that help me identify myself as a weaver. One of the things we say is the ability to connect to another being, to connect to a bigger idea, to connect to nature, to the universe, to connect to a community. Uh, and I kept thinking of, okay, what does this connection mean? How does it show up? How do I know I'm connecting? And what I learned is one was in in our ability to listen authentically, uh, listen not to respond, listen to understand, listen to build connection. Uh, and in that authentic listening, uh, what emerges and what has emerged for me is the sense of uh, the question of, okay, how can I help this person? What is it they need in the moment? Is it validation? Is it just listening and nodding? Is it helping them get to a solution? Is it asking the right questions to help them find their own solution? Uh, is it directing them in a different path? What is it in the listening? So I think the question that emerges is that what would I offer in the listening? And it's never a response, it's never a reaction, it's always something more. The second thing in that in this field of connection has been uh, that we always operate from a space of generosity. And what I mean by that is, one is that I let go of my own agenda of why am I with this person, with this community, with this space, but really kind of listen to the emergence of a shared agenda that's coming in. And then in that space, what is my offering, right? And that always comes from a space of generosity. Even something as simple as if I'm at a conference and I meet someone, if I meet a funder who could support my organization, before I pitch my work or get into that agenda, can I let go of that agenda and listen to them, their story, who they are, and how they identify themselves? Where do they come from? And in that, can I make a generous offering that will enrich them, that will nurture them, that will help them with whatever they are seeking? And it's that relational connection that is a core principle of weaving. Uh, and as we do that, and as we build on each other's listening and ideas, is where then the alignment starts happening towards a shared purpose, uh, which sometimes could happen in a 10-minute conversation. Sometimes it might take many conversations. In community spaces, it requires a lot of listening, and again, listening and creating safety and trust. The second principle around that for me has been the principle of collaboration. Uh, uh, you know, my old sense has been that I'm not very good at collaboration because I come from an education system that only taught me competition, and that's the only way I knew grew up. And even though I never liked competition, I didn't know how else to be. And when you come in by default into a conversation from a space of competition, you always bring your agenda, you bring your ego, you bring your own sense of self. So how do you then let go of that? So for me, then collaboration has been a journey of listening, of aligning, also about moving at the speed of trust. So not just kind of pushing towards a certain outcome, holding back, uh, focusing on the trust, focusing on the safety, then moving at the speed of trust. It has been not so much about reaching an end goal, but more about how can we walk together. Right? So before we kind of define the end goal, how do we learn to walk together? How do we learn to walk with the same pace? And walk together then has notions of equity, diversity, inclusion, right? Deeply entrenched in them. Uh, Recognizing and appreciating the fact that the process is as important, than, if not more, than the outcome. Uh, and finally, it has been that that when we really start moving to this space of listening, connection, alignment, collaboration, it moves into a space where we start understanding the complexity of systems around us. Uh, and we start recognizing that our work is not about solutions. It's not about transactions. It's not about programs and projects. Our work is about shifting mindsets. And if you have to shift mindsets, then we have to understand mindsets. We have to accept mindsets. And we have to build newer, fresher narratives together, not my narrative versus your narrative. And that's why this whole the journey of weaving, the idea of weaving is a journey. It's a journey of walking together. It's not an agenda that you come together and fix it and move forward. That's been my own journey of how weaving has become an identity that I take on.
Lana, I'm wondering if you have any additions to those principles um, around weaving before we
Now,
open the for
one of
questions.
the one of the things that I've been articulating about is around the importance of flocking as a way to connect and to engage with each other. Um, in yeah, nowadays we hear a lot around trauma and trauma informed practices, and one of the points of inquiries that I'm very curious about is how can we create communities that are more healing centered. Um and by creating healing centered communities, we promote more the salutogenesis or the strengths, the inherent strengths that are already within individuals and within communities. And when I look at it from that lens of fullness and that lens of we have everything that we need inside of us, that creates for me that openness of, okay, then how can we amplify strengths, how can we amplify inherent goodness, how can we amplify the assets that we already have within our communities. And for me, and this is why the weaving is the framework, because um I see weaving as a means to reconnect with those inherent assets and inherent goodness. How can we find our way to each other? How can we find what is strong with us rather than what's wrong with us? And this is what Vishal was also mentioning around shifting of mindsets. How can we create a society where rather than looking at it, increasing progress every time, but how can we shift the mindset to care? Because so much of what we care about, we take care of, we advocate for, we become more aware of. So when we're looking at a community that is weaving with each other, it also looks at how can we tend to those that are around us. How can we look at these ecosystems that are around us and say, hey, who are the voices that are not being heard? Who needs the most tending? Who needs the most caring? And how can we offer that? And when we shift that our lens to care, when we shift our lens to connection, when we shift our lens to collaboration and to community, then we see what the ecosystem is, and then we build from what we already have.
I love that wholeness in all senses, between also both of your reflections and also this phrase, how do we focus on what is strong with us rather than what is wrong with us? That's really resonating. I would love to open the room to a question. Whoever would like to ask a question, raise your hand. Use the raise hand emoji or the feature, and I will invite your question, or feel free to put it in the chat. Success, please.
Hi, Vishal. Hi, Lana. Thank you so much for sharing, the wonderful pieces on what weaving is all about. When you were sharing, I was just on some key things that I have applied in my work, and also looking at what we've done so far, preparing and planning towards the Learning Festival. So there was something you had mentioned about looking at what we have and amplifying the strength. So what happens when, as a weaver, what we've been doing is looking forward to making sure that our weaknesses, we try to work on that. How do we move our lessons from just amplifying the strengths, but also ensuring that there is a balanced perspective? Oh, I know that this is where I'm not so good at, but I also want to work on it. So how do we ensure that we do that without, losing focus on what we're supposed to do?
I'll jump in on that, because that's also one of the things that we often hear when we're advocating more for asset-based community development. It's well, but how do we address the problems then, or how do we address what is needed? One of the things that has worked a lot, from those that I've engaged with and the organizations that I've been part of, is to how can we use our strengths to be able to attend to the things that we need to tend to. So it's shifting the lens to first, let's identify our strengths, and can we use our strengths in looking at, if there are challenges or problems within communities, how can we use the strengths that we have in addressing those? There was a study by McCaskey that was written in, if I'm not mistaken, around 2008, wherein he identified that when we are looking more from a pathogenic lens, we start with we look at the problem, then we look at the labels around the problem, and then we look at the deficits that we're seeing, and that's the only time that we add change to it. Oh, this needs to change because I see this as a problem. So the questions and the data that you're then looking for is how can we mitigate that problem, or how can we address that problem? And so that is that is the cycle. Yet if we go with, let's add the change at the start by saying, what is it that we're strong with? What is it that we're already working well? And how can we identify that? And how can we amplify that? And how can we then see what are the different areas that we might use our strengths so that that also goes well? Then your cycle becomes different. And this for me is one way to use a bit more of that, strengths-based practices, so that one, we do not waste too much energy, resources, time, because we're already building on what's already strong.
I love that. And it reminds me of a point that Bayo Akomolafe yesterday made about how sometimes our focus on the problem is the problem, and we go around in circles rather than seeing the bigger picture, seeing the ecosystem, seeing our interconnectedness. Vishal, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that question.
Nothing. I think Lana's captured that very well.
Wonderful. We may have one more, if we have one more question, to have space. If not, then I have a question, and it's something that's been really on my heart mind as a weaver, because often, it's really easy. It's not easy, but it is maybe more intuitive to understand how to weave where there's already quite a bit of coherence. Just maybe we don't see our strengths, we don't see that coherence. How do you weave? How do you build that trust when there's actually quite a bit of dissonance or conflict or polarizing opinions. And this is coming from also a place of where we are in this world at this moment, what we're seeing. What are some practices there to holding that space for weaving as a weaver yourself that you have maybe practiced? And is it possible?
So it's okay, I can go first, Lana. Such beautiful questions. Question. I know I struggle with it myself quite a bit. For me, weaving is like any other journey, an inside-out process. So the exploration that I'm sitting on is that if I see dissonance around me, what is that is dissonant inside of me? If I see polarization outside of me, what is it inside of me that's polarized? What is it inside of me that's not receiving the listening, the care? What is it that is inside of me that is hating something out on the outside? So I think it's more an exploration of the inner self, and the more and better I explore that, the better I understand the world outside of me. And as I begin to understand the world outside of me, it shifts how I look at the world itself.
That's right. An inside out what is polarized inside of me that is polarizing the process. Thank you for sharing that. Lana,
Yeah.
any
One of the things that I'm practicing more and more is allowing spaces to grieve. I think this is where dissonance and polarization is really about, because we are stuck with our own strategies and how we want our needs to be met. And in the same way that I have my own strategies, the other person have their own strategies. And when we do not hold space for the grief that's inside of us, that would allow for the letting go of our own strategies and allow for the meeting of each other's needs, then polarization and dissonance would continue. So grieving for me is a place of really tuning into where is the resistance coming from. What is the yearnings behind the position or the stance that each person is taking. And I'm reminded time and time again to move away from the golden rule and try to embody more the platinum rule. And in the platinum rule is to do unto others how others would want to be treated. And when I tap into that, I tap into, but what is the other person yearning? And why is this their preferred strategy? And how might we create a space where we can open each other's hearts and say, hey, this is what I'm yearning. This is what's coming up from me. And to be able to listen, like what Vishal has said, can we use that space of listening? And in Filipino, the term pakikiramdam, I often use it also as listening with the third ear. So listening to the spaces and to the points that we do not even hear. So how can we get into that deep attunement with each other, that even though there's no words that are shared, that we can still understand, hey, there's something underneath that needs to be explored.
Oof. Thank you both for this wisdom, for this woven conversation, and may we all grow third ears to deeper listening within ourselves and each other. And happy birthday, Lana.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.